Shavu. Oh, hi, we're live. Siftah, Parshat Tetzaveh. Shir today is sponsored by an anonymous recent Ola who wants to dedicate the shir to Efrat's wonderful, amazing community. I'll give you a brief overview of this week's Parsha, Tetzaveh. So Tetzaveh and Teruma often go together, except we didn't. Teruma Tetzaveh are very similar in that last week we didn't have a Parsha shir, we had a Adar shir. But Teruma mostly describes the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash in great detail and the fabrics and materials of the Mishkan, and Tetzaveh goes into great detail on the garments of the Kohanim and the Kohanim Gedolim, and that's the bulk of the Parsha. The Parsha begins, the reason it's called Tetzaveh is because the first verse in this week's Parsha, it's in your source sheets, is V'ata Tetzaveh es Bnei Yisrael, and you, referring to Moshe, should command the Jewish people, V'yikchu elecha shemen zayizach, kasas lamar l'halar snar tamid, you should command the Jewish people, they should bring you olive oil that's been crushed for lighting the eternal flame lamp on the menorah. We'll maybe discuss that briefly. Another thing to note is that this is the only Parsha in the Torah from Moshe's birth until Devarim, where his name is not mentioned. And that is, we'll get to that later, but just to note, this is the only Parsha that Moshe's name is not mentioned by name, rather by reference like V'ata, you, without his name being mentioned. And even in Devarim, the entire book of Devarim, it says, was said by Moshe Rabbeinu. So really from his birth, obviously he can't be mentioned before his birth, but he's mentioned throughout the entire Torah besides for this week's Parsha. Then after that, the commandment of Hashem to tell Moshe, to tell Bnei Israel to bring him the olive oil for them in lighting the menorah. Then the rest of that Aaron is supposed to light every single day from evening. He lights the menorah in the evening before it gets dark until the next morning. And one of the candles always stayed lit. One of the flames on the menorah, that was the Ner Tamid. Then it spends the rest of the Parsha pretty much going into great detail of the garments, the clothing worn by the Kohanim. The priests while they were doing their avoda. So all Kohanim had to wear 4 garments at all times. A ketonet, which was a full-length white linen tunic, and mikhnasayim, which were the linen loose pants, mitznefet migba'at, which was a linen turban, so a lot of linen. And we're actually going to talk about the healing properties of wearing linen, and the avnate, which was a long sash that they wore above their waist. So that was the 4 things that every regular Kohen, it's called a Kohen Hediot, wore. A Kohen Gadol wore all those 4 and 4 more garments, 4 vest clothing. He wore the ephod, which was an apron-like garment made of blue, purple, and red dyed wool, and linen and gold thread all sewn together. So it was this beautiful, colorful apron. So on top of the ephod, which was the apron, was tied the choshen, which was attached to it. The choshen was the breastplate that had 12 precious stones inscribed with the names of the 12 shvatim of Bnei Israel, and the me'il, which was a cloak made of blue wool with gold bells and decorated pomegranates along the hem that made noise as he walked. So pomegranates and bells. The Gemara goes into detail whether it was like 30, pretty much it's 72 in total, 36 in the front, 32 in the back. It had to be very exact in which fabrics and colors and threads it used and how it was sewn. And then the 8th garment was the tzitz. The tzitz was a gold plate that he wore on his forehead, had inscribed with the words Kadosh Lashem, right? So that's pretty much the bulk of the Parsha. And then the end of the Parsha, Hashem describes in detail the 7-day inauguration. We said last week in Adar Shir that 7 was a theme in this week's Parsha because Moshe passed away on Zayin Adar. Moshe's passing, Zayin Adar, almost always falls in conjunction with Parshat Tetzaveh. Falls out right before or right after. So it's always connected. So there's a very big connection to the essence of Moshe and this week's Parsha, which really has us question why it's the only Parsha that doesn't mention Moshe's name, when you would think that this Parsha of all Parshios, so some say it might hint to Moshe's passing because he passed away in conjunction with this week's Parsha, so his name is removed from it because we have a loss of Moshe. But we take that much further to understand that it wouldn't be a negative thing. It's also Moshe's birthday, and that Moshe, and we learn that the Zohar tells us that when a tzaddik passes away, he's not found less, he's actually found much more. Not only in the higher world, but even in the physical, even in this world, a tzaddik is actually more present in this world, even more than before he passed away. So it would be unusual to take Moshe's name out of the parsha that he passed, that's connected to or read around the time Zayin Adar when he passed away, if he's found even more. The Zohar tells us for many reasons. Why? Because his soul and is less limited by the limitations of a body, meaning being able only to talk to or answer one person's questions at a time, where after the passing, the soul has all of the kochos, but without the limitations of time and body. and the soul can connect and answer many people at the same time. The soul's present in this world and gives and continues to be the to give influence to the people that connected to it during its lifetime, and anyone whose soul was connected to it after its lifetime, just as before, if not more. That's why we had a whole share about this. We continue to go to the gravesite of a person, or especially a tzaddik, or anyone that's loved, because their presence, their soul, their spirit, their influence is just as much there. The connection that we had to them continues, doesn't end just because their body didn't continue. So the physical connection might be limited, or different, but the deeper levels of connection are all there. So that we kind of will touch on that, and then mostly we'll talk about clothing and the seemingly unusual obsession with detail about what the Kohanim wore. It's just a spiritual avoda, and it was supposed to be like a home for Hashem, yet we're focusing so much on exactly what they wore, how they wore it, how it was sewn, the colors. It seems like, okay, let them wear something beautiful, white, just say wear all white clothing, but the exact details on the length and the size of their clothing and how it's washed and laundered and which fabrics are used seem to be a little excessive and excessively unnecessarily obsessing over clothing, which can subtract and take away from divine service rather than add to it if we're so focused and spending the majority of an entire parsha in the Torah just to describe what the Kohanim wore. And even further, what would that even if the Kohanim had to wear specific avoda, clothing for their avoda, why spend an entire parsha in the Torah? The Torah is eternal. So what is our eternal message that we can learn from the real, I don't want to use the word obsession, but what's a better word, the focus and the elaboration in such great detail about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol that's not relevant to us. We're not Kohanim. None of us are here male Kohanim. So how does that relate, and what can we learn for generations now, even when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash? What does that tell us? So we're going to discuss a lot about that. So I was going to the end of the Parsha where Hashem describes in detail the 7-day inauguration, because he said Moshe was born on the 7th and passed away on the 7th of Adar. Also, the sign of Adar is the fish, Dag, which is Gematria 7, because it's Dag, Dalet, and Gimel, 4 and 3. And then at the end of the Parsha, we have a 7-day inauguration in which every single day Moshe put up the entire Mishkan himself, and then took it down until Hashem's Shekhinah rested in it. Because for 7 days, the Shekhinah didn't come into the Ohel. And then the 7th day, they saw the Shekhinah, they saw the presence of Hashem in the clouds and the fire, in all the miracles that they experienced. So finally, they stopped. Moshe kept it up at the 7th day. So that was connected to this idea of 7. I'll just mention now that the reason that it was specifically a 7-day inauguration, Chanukah of the Mishkan, is because Hashem was saying something really powerful, that this world is created in 7 days for the only purpose that the Shekhinah be present in this world. That the whole 7 days of creation, Hashem made the world in order that His Shekhinah and Hashem's divine presence be present in the physical world. And from the sin of Adam and Chava, the Shekhinah left the world, and for thousands of years, until the Mishkan was finally created, there was no place for Hashem to be present in the physical world. There was no home for Hashem in the physical. The physical and the spiritual were separate, and Hashem's Shekhinah was not present in the world. Like we said, there was a divide between upper and lower worlds. So finally now, with the Mishkan, Hashem saying, I want to be back in the world, which was the purpose of my creation of the world in 7 days. So the purpose of creation of this world in 7 days is being fulfilled in this 7-day inauguration of the Mishkan to finally show us what Hashem wants. Hashem wants to be present in the finite, materialistic building of the Mishkan, in all of the materials. The Mishkan that was made up of all the levels of physical material matter. So it was made up of domem, which is inanimate objects, by the minerals of gold, silver, copper, which represent, or the domem mineral level of creation, and then someach, which is the plant level of creation, so all of the natural fibers and the woods that were used in the Beis Hamikdash, and in chai, which is animalized through the karbanos, and then medaber, by the human beings that are involved in avoda. So in all levels of physical creation, Hashem wants to be present, and specifically it's happened in Adar, which means Aleph Dar. Hashem is finally here and present. So Hashem, the Aleph one is Dar, is not just hovering over, but is living in the world. So obviously Hashem influenced our world for the thousands of years before the Mishkan was created, but only in this week's Parsha, after the Mishkan was actually set up and Hashem's Shekhinah came into it, was Hashem in the world and not just influencing it from above and having an above influence on the world, taking us out of Mitzrayim and speaking to us from above, but rather Hashem is actually present in the physical objects, that the physical Mishkan became godly and it became holy. In the miracles that we saw in it, and in the ways and the halachos that we have to treat the Mishkan with holiness. So that's just the idea of the 7 days of inauguration. So let's go back to a little bit about the connection of Moshe Rabbeinu's essence, and then we'll talk about clothing, because that's the bulk of this week's, the majority of what the Parsha discusses. So going a little bit to Moshe, the reason that Moshe's name is not in this week's Parsha is brought down in the Medrash. It says that when Moshe was davening for the Jewish people to be saved from the Chet Egel, when Hashem said he's going to destroy the entire Jewish nation and recreate a new one from a new nation, starting with Moshe Rabbeinu, and wipe everyone else out, Moshe davened to Hashem, and one of the things he said is that it's a pasuk in Kisisa, and it says, Im Sisa Vainam, if you atone for their sin and take away their sin, then great. Im ayin, if not, mechenina mesifrecha. If you do not, then wipe me out of your book. And even though Hashem did forgive them, so that clause wasn't relevant anymore because Hashem did forgive them, nevertheless it says all the words of a tzaddik are mekoyam, are fulfilled, because the word of a tzaddik is emes, and therefore it has to be fulfilled in some way. Remember, we saw this by Yaakov when he said, whoever took your idols will die, and that's why and they said that the word of a tzaddik is eternal and has so much weight and is emes, so that's why Rachel Imenu had to pass away when she did. So in this case, even though it didn't happen, because Moshe said those words, Mechenina Mesifrecha, that's why Hashem in some way it had to come out that Moshe's name was taken out of the Torah. So there's one parsha where Moshe's name is not mentioned, and it happens to be this week's Parshat Tetzaveh, which is connected to Moshe's passing, because it's always read in the time of his passing. So why is it connected? And the next question is kind of, why would Moshe be punished? He was sacrificing himself for the purpose of, because he was a great leader and saying, I don't want to be involved in your Torah if you were going to kill the Jewish nation. Why should he be punished by having his name removed from the Torah? Moshe is the Torah, right? Moshe's entire essence was being Torah. We say Torah Tzibalanu Moshe, right? So why should he be punished by having a separation from the Torah just because of his words? They have to be eternal. So we actually, in Chassidus, we explore this and say that not only was it not a punishment, it's actually a message to us about who the essence of Moshe was. Specifically, when a tzaddik passes away, on that day it says all of his soul is revealed, and the time of his passing, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when he passed away, all of the Zohar was revealed, all of the essence of his entire Torah, his life teaching was revealed, and he revealed all of it, and the day he passed away, and he said that's why he said that we should celebrate his passing and not mourn it. So the day, we learn that the day of a tzaddik passing, or a day of someone's passing, all of their good deeds and the essence of their entire life is revealed. So in this week's Parsha, Hashem is revealing to us the essence of what a Moshe Rabbeinu is and what a true leader is. Oh, good morning everyone who's watching live. Sorry, you just commented. And thank you, shout out to Siftach for their amazing chai lattes and service and hosting our shir. Okay, so Moshe's name not being in the Parsha is telling us that a name of a person is really, although it's their essence, it's not their entire essence, right? Because we said a name is, your essence comes to you through your name, but your name itself doesn't tell us all of you. It only tells us a little bit about you, and it expresses you, but it also limits you in some way. So it's a part of your essence, but not your entire essence, because you share a name with other people. So Moshe's name is his essence, but on his passing, his essence is revealed beyond just Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's why he's referred to not by name at all, but by beyond name, by Atza, you. You Moshe, you who are all of you beyond your name. Your entire essence is revealed in this week's Parsha, and it's actually revealed in this first verse, the mission of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the words Parshat Tetzaveh are very significant in Chabad, in the Chabad community, because the last mimer, Hasidic discourse that the Rebbe gave us, the Rebbe said to in public to the Chassidim before he passed away, was a mimer on this pasuk Parshat Tetzaveh. So the mimer, the words Parshat Tetzaveh, we call the mimer Parshat Tetzaveh, and we kind of see it as his final message to us, how to get through Galus without him, right? And what a leader is and what a Moshe Rabbeinu is. So it's very significant, this mimer. It's one of the first mimerim that you learn when you're in high school, a girl in high school, learning this really complicated, deep Hasidic discourse with tremendous Kabbalistic ideas, but it's seen as essential to what the Rebbe's mission to us and instruction to us was, because the Rebbe, clearly, knew what was to come and said this mimer on this pasuk. So it's a really long mimer. I encourage you to learn it. It's in English with tons of explanations online in the Chabad.org and many places. You just have to Google Parshat Tetzaveh. You can read English summaries of it, but I'll just give you a little bit of a summary of it, of how Chassidus takes this pasuk. So the pasuk literally means, Parshat Tetzaveh, you Moshe should command Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, v'yikhu elecha, they should bring to you olive oil crushed for lighting, shemen zayis zach kastis lamar lahalas ner tamid. So you should instruct Bnei Yisrael to bring you olive oil crushed from olives to light the menorah and the eternal flame. There's a lot of questions and unusual expressions used in this verse. For example, V'ata Tetzaveh is unusual. Usually you would just say Tzav as Bnei Yisrael, not, and you should Tetzaveh. Also, so we learn a deeper message in this pasuk, and in the way that it's written, that there's a lot of deeper messages for us. First of all, Tetzaveh means not only command, but Tetzaveh has a second meaning that means savta, to unite, to combine two things, to join two things. So what Hashem is telling Moshe, not just Tzav, command Bnei Yisrael, but Ata Tetzaveh, that what is your essence, Moshe? To unite Bnei Yisrael, to connect Bnei Yisrael to Ein Sof, to the infinite, to the infinity, and to connect Bnei Yisrael to their infinite self inside of them, to their inner selves. Hi, Tzipora, welcome.
I was listening live.
Aw, I didn't see you. Well, only if you comment. Okay, so Ata Tetzaveh Bnei Yisrael, you should unite, not just you should command the people, but you, Moshe, your essence and your job is to unite the Jewish people with Hashem, to connect us and bring us closer to the Ein Sof. The Yikhlei Lecha, and when you do this, why would the Jewish people, the questions on the Mefarshim ask, why would we bring the oil to Moshe if Aaron was one lighting the menorah? Because the deeper message is that when Moshe, when the Moshe Rabbeinu connects us to Hashem, to Ein Sof, the Yikhlei Lecha, we Bnei Yisrael add the Yikhlei Lecha Shem and Zayis. We add olive oil and purity and holiness, which is represented by oil, to Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu gets elevated, and he is elevated by uniting us to Hashem. And that's how he achieves his ultimate elevation and his ultimate connection and growth is through connecting us to Ein Sof and to our inner core. Kasis Lamar is described, we're going to talk about this a lot in connection to Purim, but in brief, it means crushed for lighting. That, why does it say, it says kasis lahatir is what it should really say, not crushed to get closer to the illuminary, but we learn that that's what the Jewish people are, that when we're crushed, just like olives when they're crushed, we get the purest olive oil. Also the Jewish people, when we're in a state of being crushed by galus, when we're in a difficult situation, when we're being oppressed, or when we're in a really oppressing situation, that's when we achieve the more, we achieve the greatest light that comes out, because we're able to go deep down into the source of all of our life, the light, the source of our soul, the godliness and infinity inside of us, and connect to that, because we're so oppressed. Suddenly a Jew, like we see that a Jew who never kept Torah mitzvahs, who was secular his whole life, and then he's oppressed and told convert to Christianity or die, suddenly his innermost connection to Hashem, the essence that he is Hashem and that he can't be separate from Hashem, shines through. Only when he's oppressed and squeezed does that essence shine through, and he says, I'd rather die than give up my life for Hashem. And it's happened time after time in history. No one understands why they suddenly feel this tremendous connection. I'd rather die for Hashem when I never lived a day in my life learning Torah mitzvahs. So when we're squeezed, the innermost core of our soul, that in essence of who we are is Hashem, comes out. So Kasas Lama'ar tells us that this is when it comes out. And then we say Lahalo Isner Tamid, that this is the essence of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Mimer explains the different parts of the pasuk and puts them together. But in short, it's saying that Moshe's job is to connect Bnei Yisrael to Ein Sof and Lahalos Ner Tamid. Now the natural way of saying this would be lehadzlik ner tamid, right? Not to raise up the ner tamid. You light a candle, you don't uplift a candle, but what it's saying on the inside is that we don't need to light a new flame. That the job of Moshe Rabbeinu, that your essence, Moshe Rabbeinu, is to not to light flames inside Jewish people, because every Jewish soul has a flame inside of it. At its core, there's an inextinguishable flame, the ner tamid, right? It's a ner tamid because it's always lit. There's no need to light it. All you need to do is lahalos, to raise up that flame. The flame might be dim, it might be covered up. You have to uplift the flame, brighten it, and bring out the flame that's already there. And that's the job of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's when they asked the Rebbe, what is the job of a Rebbe? Or the fifth Chabad Rebbe, they said, the Rebbe Yashab, what is a chassid? And he said a chassid is a lamplighter, that he goes from, just like a lamplighter at night goes, in the olden days, they weren't electric, from lamp to lamp in the street and lights the torch to light it up. That's what a chassid does. There's a lamp and an ner tamid in every single soul, in every single creation, and in every single person in creation. And our job is to just find those souls and light their lamp, and not just to light it because it's already lit. Lahalos, just to uplift it. Lahalos ner tamid, and that's the difference, I guess, between what Jonathan Sachs said this about going back. So that's what the job of Moshe is. Moshe's job is to unite Bnei Yisrael, Ata Tetzaveh, to connect Bnei Yisrael to Ein Sof, and to connect them back to their ner tamid that's inside of them, to uplift and to raise up their inner flame, to make it more visual, to light it up a little bit more, and to make them aware of the fact that their connection, their essence is divinity and is Ein Sof and is beautiful. and to uplift them and connect them back to their soul. And then his job is done because that soul will burn on its own. And then he can leave, and as long as he makes sure that it's lighting on its own, it says Aaron had to make sure that the flame was lit strongly enough that it's on its own, and he goes on to the next flame. So that's the mission of, that's really the message of that we're learning about who Moshe Rabbeinu is. And the Rebbe says in his Maimer that he brings us down from the Gemara that says that the Moshe Rabbeinu is that there's a Moshe in every single generation. In every generation there's a leader that is like the head of the generation, and just like the feet uplift the head, with the generation also, every generation the Moshe is like the head that connects the body to each other, unites them, connects them to their soul, and unites them and brings them closer to Hashem. And the feet take the head to places that only the feet can take it to. We also bring the Moshe Rabbeinu to where it needs to go. And he says just in every generation there is a Moshe like Mordechai in his generation. And in our generation, something that Jonathan Sachs said that about the Rebbe is that the most leaders create followers, but a true leader creates other leaders. And he said that the Lubavitcher Rebbe wasn't looking to create followers. He wasn't saying that the Rebbe is a lamplighter and every chassid is a lamp that he has to light. He was saying every chassid is his own lamplighter. That he was teaching us how to be our own lamplighters. And the Frierdiker Rebbe before him was sending out his chassidim, don't be around me and follow me and worship me. He said, you don't need to live here. The Rebbe said, I only need a minion here to be in my shul. The rest of you need to go out and find lamps of souls to uplift their lamp, uplift their godly flame. Be your own lamplighter. You're a leader on your own. You don't need to be here, following me. You need to go out and light souls. And the story continues that he asked, what is a chatzis? He says a lamplighter, that he goes out at night and lights and uplifts every single flame in the darkness. And he says, but what if the flame is in the middle of the desert? He says, then he has to go into the desert, right? That's like the shluchim that go, not like us, but the shluchim that go to far-flung corners of the world and find those lamps that just need to be uplifted a little bit and reconnected with themselves. And then he says, and what if the lamp is in the ocean? He says, then he has to take off his clothes and jump in the ocean and light that lamp. Because really, that's the level of Mesiras Nefesh. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu's essence was. That by Moshe not having his name in the Parsha, it's not a punishment for him. It tells us who the essence of Moshe was. The essence of Moshe was that he put himself aside, that if we weren't going to be in the picture, he didn't want to be connected to the Torah at all. Because his entire essence of a true leader is complete self-sacrifice for his nation. That's what Moshe's essence was. So revealing his essence in this week's Parsha is telling us, when he passes away, this is Moshe's essence, that he would rather not be in the Torah, mentioned in the Torah, because he is self-sacrifice for his nation. That's what a true leader is. He puts his people first, and he's nothing without his followers or leaders or his nation. Okay. Any questions? Should anyone want to add something before we move on to clothing? Okay, clothing. This is fun. I've actually gotten this question from a few people this week who asked me what is the deeper intention is with the detail of the clothing, the extreme detail. If you read the Parsha, there are, forget how many verses, just dedicated to describing the detail of how the clothing are made. Let's backtrack and see how much emphasis the Torah places on clothing and what we wear from beginning of time, right? We were born, created naked. Every one of us is born naked. And if the world was perfect, then the soul would be the only thing that was expressed. We wouldn't be able to see the external. There would be only living as souls, and we wouldn't need clothing, right? But Adam and Chava, as soon as they were aware of their bodies, then suddenly they realized they have to cover it because their bodies are very distracting. So they made themselves clothing. And it says, I brought you the source, Vayas Hashem Elokim Adam. In the very first beginning of time, we already have a verse dedicated to clothing, that Adam and Chava made themselves clothing, and Vayas Hashem Elokim Adam L'Ishtai Katnos Or Balabishem. Hashem made them garments out of or, which is skin, animal skin, but also it can mean or, garments of light that beautified them and made them shine and shone their souls, and dressed them. Hashem dressed them. How amazing is that, right? They're like, and
wasn't it after sin?
Yeah, after the sin. Before they were living happily naked in their nudist colony, and they're divide. There was no bodily awareness. Their body wasn't distracting. They lived their soul was able to express itself without anything external on that level. But once they sinned, Hashem made them clothing. So that's the first place in the Torah we see clothing. Now throughout the Torah, we don't even realize how much of an emphasis there is on what we wear. Obviously there is the laws of tznius, but that came much later on. Going back in time, there's for sure places I'm missing, but fast forwarding to the Jews in Egypt, it says that they didn't change their clothing. And what's one of the merits that they had? What do you mean they didn't change their clothing? It wasn't they didn't dress immodestly, it's that they had their own style and they didn't adapt to the Egyptian style of clothing. The Egyptian fashion, the Egyptians had one way of dressing, the Jews had another way of dressing. And because they didn't adapt their clothing, that is one of the merits that they didn't leave. Now, there's something fascinating that says that...
One of their merits for leaving?
that's one of their merits for being saved. For their three merits for being saved, is they didn't change their name, their clothing,
and their language.
And their language.
And it doesn't say that because it was sneeze?
No, not sneeze. It was just that they weren't assimilating, that they weren't just being influenced by the cultural clothing and changing their identity to assimilate the Egyptians. Now, we understand this deeper through a really interesting source that tells us, in the Pasuk, we learned that when Yosef was being tempted by the wife of Potiphar, she tried everything to seduce him, and she couldn't get him to sleep with her. So she said, this is the word, the Pasuk says, I think I brought this, did I bring this? I keep thinking I brought things. But anyways, it says, Va'titfais bivgadav, that she grabbed on his clothing, right? And he ran away and left his clothing with her. So on the one level, she grabbed his shawl. She was trying to force him to sleep with her. And he ran away, and it says she had his shawl on his hands, and then she used that, hi, good morning. And it says in one way that she used that as proof and says, look, he accosted me, assaulted me, and I have his clothing to prove it. But on a deeper level, it says, what do you mean, v'titfos bigbadev? She grabbed onto his clothing. It's an unusual way of speaking, and we learned from this that she said, maybe I can't influence, I can't seduce him, but if I can get him to change his style of clothing, then I can get him to sleep with me. So she tried to influence his style of clothing by buying him Egyptian clothing, telling him that he has to look more like the Egyptians, and she tried to make him dress differently in order that if he dressed differently, then he would sleep with her. How incredible is that and intuitive? We're going to talk about that later. So, and it says he left the clothing with her. He wasn't swayed and didn't change his dress. So she tried to influence him through his clothing, which is really interesting. Elsewhere in the Torah, where else do we see in the Torah? You can chime in if you think of anything in the Torah where it tells us about what we wear. Well, then there's the laws of shatnez, which we're going to talk about the deeper. Please, somebody, if I forget to tie in one of these ends, ask me, because they all really do tie in. There's the laws of shatnez, which tell us, which seem so unusual. Obviously, it's a chok, we don't understand it, but why does the Torah care what fabrics of clothing we wear? It's not even sneeze. You can wear like a really modest coat, but because it has wool and linen, obviously it's a chok, we don't understand, but there actually is really deep implications in what we wear, and it tells us more about also it says people shouldn't cross-dress, men and women shouldn't cross-dress. And there's the commandment of men, besides for the laws of modesty, which have evolved right over time. There's also the laws of men wearing a covering over their head, called a kippah or yarmulke, to bring godly awareness, and the tzitzit, that every four-cornered garment, which is a chok, has strings on it, which kind of remind them about that they were taken out of Mitzrayim. Okay, so that if they wear a four-cornered tunic, that there should be strings on it. And those strings serve as a reminder every time we see the tzitzit, that as a reminder that Hashem took it out of Mitzrayim. So physical reminders in our clothing. So we have so much in the Torah which seems like unusually detailed about what we wear. Why does the Torah care about what I wear, right? The Torah wants to care about my spiritual life, but what does the Torah care about what I wear when I go to bed, how I get dressed, what fabrics I wear? And it's highlighted, I guess, at the most in this week's Parsha. That's where the question, I guess, comes the largest because of the breadth and the length of the expression. I brought a picture, I'll show you soon, of the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. Have you all seen it? There's like even kids' costumes, right? Or you have a bunch in your Gemara. Okay, so I brought a Gemara in the source that goes into one level. The Gemara does say why the length of the description of what the Kohanim wore, and I brought it for you in the source sheet. It says that it goes back, and in the Yikra, it says why is the chapters about the Parsha, the dealing with the sacrifices, connected to the clothing, because right after it goes through all the sacrifices in the first 7 chapters of Vayikra, in chapter 8 it goes into the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. And the Gemara says it's to teach us that just like sacrifices atone, clothing of the Kohen Gadol also atoned. What does that mean? The sacrifices are brought to atone for different imperfections, and the clothing as well. So it goes through each of the clothing and tells us that each one of the 8 clothing that were worn by the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol was to atone for a different type of imperfection inside our soul. And it was deeper than just an external garment. So they're telling us that there's more layers to it. On the one level, it's just clothing, but on another level, it's a deeper atonement in specifically the way it was fashioned. So I'll read it. Let's read it together in the source sheet. The juxtaposition of the priestly vestments and the passages and the sacrifices tell us that they're both atone. So it goes through it. I thought I had it in Hebrew, but it says that the tunic atoned for bloodshed because it resembles the tunic of Yosef that they dipped into blood. So when the Kohen wore a tunic, it was an atonement for the blood, for any type of sin of bloodshed amongst the Jewish people. It would remind Hashem that it was a pure tunic, unlike the one of Yosef that they dipped into blood. So it was atoning for that. the trousers, the michnasayim, atoned for illicit relations, because the michnasayim were meant to cover up the erva of the Kohen when he took big steps, so it would atone for any sin of illicit or unhealthy sexual relations. The hat, the turban that they wore, atoned for arrogance, because it says, from where does this come from? Rabbi Chanina says that an object of elevation on their head would atone for anyone who had a sense of haughtiness or elevation, or thinks that he's higher than someone else. The holy turban would atone for that and have a kapara for that. And then he continues and he says that the belt atones for any improper desire of the heart, any improper thought, jealousy, any unhealthy desire. Here, Horei Lev, it says, because the belt was underneath the heart, it would atone for any feelings of the heart that were unhealthy. The Choshen atoned for bad judgments. If we judge somebody unfavorably or had cast a bad judgment on somebody, because it says Choshen Mishpat. Because it's called the Choshen Mishpat, it atoned for bad judgments. And it goes so on and so forth. It says the ephod atoned for idol worship, which was the apron, and so on and so forth. And the robe atoned for malicious speech, for slander. Why did the robe atone for slander? Because the robe, the me'il, made noise when he walked. The balmaganads jingled, and they made noise. So it said, let something that makes noise come and atone for something negative that makes noise. So every single part and the design of it was designed to bring atonement and kapara, and also to, when every person would see it, they would feel an atonement or a sense of healing any part of themselves that reflected that negative thing. So when they saw the ephod, it would heal their negative judgments. When they saw the hat of the Kohen, it would help them heal their negative haughtiness and their arrogance and thinking that they're better than somebody else, and so on and so forth. And the last but not least, it says that the tzitz on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol would atone for brazenness, like vulgarity, because it's someone that it said because brazenness is on the forehead of a person and it brings pilgrim to support it. So we see from this Gemara that there's obviously a deeper intention to all the clothing. Now let's take it one step further. I encourage you to look it up. It's Zvachim Peiches 88b. There's also a medrash that explains why did the Kohen have to wear such specific garments. And the medrash says there was a prince who had a tutor, and the tutor would have to come in with the king's room to consult about the prince's education. But he was fearful because there was terrifying guards all over surrounding the king, and every time he went in, he would tremble with fear. So the king didn't want him to be fearful, so he took his robe and placed it upon the tutor, so he would walk in and no one would ever harm him, and he wouldn't be afraid because everyone who saw him would fear him. And the medrash says that similarly, Aaron used to enter the divine presence, the Shechina, the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim, and he would never be able to enter because of the amount of angels, protecting angels that were there, and the angels could harm him. And the only way he could enter without being harmed is if he had perfect thought, speech, and action, not even one sin. But because of that fear, it says Hashem provided him with garments that mirrored the divine garments above, so that the fear would be upon him and none of the angels could harm him. So that was another deeper intention, that they were godly garments that mirror the divine, to place the fear upon him, so that all of the angels, then the celestial beings that fill the room that Aaron would have to enter, would be fearful of him and would see the image of God on him and see the divine presence and wouldn't try to start up with him. So that's we're according to the Medrash. Now, taking it even further, not only were the clothing so detailed, but the clothing were directly connected to their avoda, to the point that if a Kohen did his avoda without wearing the clothing, not only there's a positive commandment that he has to do his avoda in all of the correct clothing. If he wasn't wearing his bigdei kahuna, not only is his entire avoda invalid, but he is liable for the death penalty, for the corporate punishment. It's listed in the averos that have the death penalty, and one of them is a Kohen or a Kohen Gadol doing the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash with the regular clothing of a regular person and not in their priestly vestments. So that is not the significance of their clothing, is not just so detailed in what they should wear, but that their entire avoda depends on the fact that they're wearing this specific clothing that they have to wear, and B, they will be liable if they purposely wear it, or then they're liable for the death penalty. That's from Talmud Gemara Zvachim 17b. Fire shares about how does this reflect in our lives? What is the significance in clothing, that it takes up so much of this parsha and the Torah, and in so many places? What are clothing? Are clothing just what we are? So clearly there's so much more to clothing than just being something we use to not be naked, right? And to cover up our bodies. We actually see that there's Rabbi Yochanan in the Gemara Shabbos, it says that he called his clothing mechubadai, my honorees, those that honor me, because clothing have such an effect on us. So we learn that clothing are not, first of all, human beings are the only creatures that clothe themselves, right? Physically and spiritually. Every other creation doesn't clothe themselves. They walk around in their own skin as they are, comfortable, and they're no shame. So human beings are the only ones that clothe themselves. And it's not just because we have an awareness and a sense of shame, because we're the only creatures that have the level of shame and inner awareness and das. That's one reason for it. It's also because clothing allow us to express our soul. Clothing are the means of expressing ourselves. Well, there's two layers to clothing we're talking about today. So in one layer, clothing are so significant, and this was discovered by Judaism since the beginning of time, and it's recently been discovered in modern psychology as something called enclothed cognition. Enclothed cognition is a term coined by Hajo Adam and Adam D. Galinsky in their experiment from 2012. It relates, so enclothed cognition is used to describe the systematic influence that clothes have on the wearer's psychological process. So the Torah from the beginning of time recognized clothing as an instrument, not just to cover up our bodies because we're aware of our nakedness and we're more in shame and more in tune, but rather as a tool and a method and a means of how clothing affects us psychologically on so many levels, not just how we feel. They say I say dress not how you feel, but how you want to feel. Or not only how you feel, because if you feel great, dress great. But dress not how you feel, right? They say don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want. Don't dress for the price. And this has been studied for the last few decades. It's probably like every single year in like multiple magazines and articles. And now there is actually someone in Dagan, and she was a therapist, and she's really into fashion. And now she combined the two, and she uses fashion therapy. She uses like clothing and fashion to influence your inner state of being. So they used to say just dress for the job you want, but now they realized, and the study was based on a study that they did where they took different people and gave them different tests to do, and they dressed a huge amount of them in lab coats, and the ones who were wearing lab coats that they told were doctor coats performed significantly better, and they had much higher levels of concentration and focus on details because they're wearing doctor coats, and doctors symbolize like concentration and focus on details. And then they did the same experiment, and they told half the people that the lab coats were painter's coats. And they said that it had to do not only with what they were wearing and the fact that they're wearing it, but also what they perceived it to be. That the people wearing painter's coats didn't do as well as the people wearing doctor's coats because they didn't have that association. So we realized that what we wear has a tremendous effect on our mental health, our success, our performance, and how we feel, right? If we wear pajamas all day, we're going to do nothing all day. But if we feel like wearing pajamas all day and we force ourselves to get dressed really beautifully and dress really well, then it's going to affect how we act and how we think and how we feel and how we do literally. So they say people taking big tests like for in school should dress really professionally and like with a suit and a tie, and they'll do much better on their test because they feel more awake, more aware, more professional, and less like slacky and distracted as if they're wearing something more casual. So it affects, the studies have been going on and on. I think there's thousands of studies already out there on the different effects that clothing have on how we feel on the inside. So we see that clothing are not just something that we wear, they have so much of an effect on our inside, and that will give us the first clue of why the Torah puts such an emphasis on what we wear and how we dress and exactly which details on fabrics. Now, going into the details on fabrics, this is really cool. Let's talk about shatnez for a minute. So that tells us, right, the Torah understood this, first of all, going to the kippah first, backtracking a bit. This psychology, the Torah already told us, by wearing a kippah, it will make you more aware that there's something above you. This clothing psychology, what did I call it? Anyone remember? I keep forgetting the name of it.
Clothing
Cognitive clothing?
No.
Clothing cognition? Enclothed cognition. So this psychology of enclothed cognition that's been discovered, I mean, they named it in 2012, but it's already been studied for the last few decades. But this has been from the beginning of time. Torah is telling us that what you wear will affect you on the inside. That's why from 3 years old, right, my son like wakes up in the middle of the night and looks for his kippah and comes to my room and says, I can't find my kippah, because he's aware of it and he's aware of what it means. And the tzitzit that a boy wears really affect his like cognition and remembering who he is. If he's a soldier, like we say in the army of Hashem. And we have this from childhood, from the beginning of time, that Hashem made them clothing of light, because it says ketones or, because the clothing expressed their soul and allowed them to express their soul. Now going back to shatnez, this is crazy. So they've begin to study. They have this newer study on the frequency of this is science, okay, the signature frequencies of different physical objects. Okay, so the average human, there was a Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Otto Heinrich Warburg. He would measure different people's signature frequency, and the average human measures at 70 to 90, okay, whatever that number means, of how much energy we reverberate. He says anyone with a number less than 50 had the signature frequency of a chronic disease, and any number less than 15 was an incurable condition like cancer or something that they wouldn't be able to survive from. So that would basically how much life force you have in you. And then they would start to measure fabrics and realize that fabrics have frequencies, and the frequency, like synthetic fabrics, have very low frequencies, and therefore they affect us mentally because they lower our body's frequency rather than raising it. And whatever fabrics we wear can raise our body's frequencies and give us more health and more life, and do the opposite.
Where'd
And
you
I've
read that?
in this study by it's called, well, it's just look up
Is there a coin word for that too?
signature. Look up Dr. Otto Heinrich Warburg and signature frequencies. Yeah, that's what it's called. So he goes through different fabrics. Okay, so the fabrics with the highest signature frequencies is linen and wool, which is crazy. Linen measures at 5,000 signature frequencies, and wool measures 5,000 signature frequencies. Okay, standard cottons lower our body's frequencies because they're at 40, but organic fabrics and organic cottons measure at 100 plus. Rayon measures at 15, and this is just, I'm literally taking this not from a Jewish source at all, just from measuring different fabrics. Now, they came to this crazy conclusion that although linen is the best fabric for people to wear. Okay, this is random because before I even heard this about, read this about this week's Parsha, I've been trying to use feng shui, however I'm pronouncing it right, and different psychological studies on how our home decor influences our mental health, because I'm realizing that my space and my clutter, like how I was telling you at Shabbat, the clutter really affects my mental health. I cannot do anything when my house is so cluttered. So building up on that, I've been researching a lot about how fabrics and textures really influence our mental health. Different colors have different effects on our mental health, colors that we wear, and fabrics and textures like plants, even if they're fake, influence our mental health very positively. And all natural fibers, which all have higher frequencies, affect our mental health significantly, and this is all study-based and proven. So the one fabric it says to have the most in your home that influences mental health is plants and linen, right? Because plants obviously are living, growing creatures, and linen has a very high frequency. So like linen curtains, linen pillow covers really affect your mental. And then I read this and I'm like, that's crazy, because like I just bought linen curtains in my room and I can't even tell you how good it makes me feel and how like light and airy and calm and relaxed, and the colors and having calm, soothing ones. Anyways, and what kind of, and feng shui and these design things tell you a bunch of things that connect to Torah as well, like not to have pictures of wild animals in your calm space because it creates anxious and scary feeling inside of you. And in Chabad, we're very careful about which animals we bring into our home, that we only bring kosher animals, and it shows like the difference. It said you can bring pictures of cows and sheep and ducks, but don't bring pictures of wild unkosher, or it doesn't say unkosher, but wild animals, which is so incredible. We've been saying this, we only eat kosher animals because what we take in affects our bodies and our psyche. So this study says, okay, that pure wool measures 5,000, and pure linen measures 5,000 signature frequencies, but when they're mixed together, they cancel each other out, and they equal zero and bring measurable weakness in human beings that wear them. It makes your body weaker and have a much lower frequency, and even pain to the human body. This study had nothing to do with Judaism, but how crazy is that? So the Torah from beginning of time has been telling us that clothing has seems like something outward that we just want to communicate to the outside world, but it has such a big effect on what we tell other people. That's always been said, right? Like clothing, if someone wears a doctor outfit, then they look like a doctor and you treat them differently. It also says in arguments that someone who's dressed professionally has an edge over somebody, will commonly win an argument with somebody who's dressed more casually, not only because of how he feels, but also because the people who are arguing him against him will defer to him because he looks more professional. So we treat other people and by the way that they're dressed, right? We really judge people by how they're dressed because that's all they're showing to us. We don't really even though the core of who we are is so much more than how we look and how we dress. When we describe someone, we don't say there's this really kind, that woman we might say, the really kind, beautiful, smiley one that was so nice. No, we say like that short, tall, freckled, dark hair, light hair, right? We describe people by their features or by what they were wearing, remember, or by what they're wearing. And there's Coco Chanel said, dress poorly and they'll remember what you wore, and dress beautifully and they'll remember the woman. That you want them to remember you by who you are. So when you dress really well, they remember you, you're remembered. And when you dress kind of really casually or really gross and dirty, they're going to remember that person had a huge stain, a huge ketchup stain across their shirt. That's what you're going to be remembered by. So you want to be refined, you want to be dignified. Hi, thanks so much for joining. This is the one level of how clothing is so important, because it affects us on so many levels. It affects other people think of us, but even more than that, it really affects our mental state, right? And like I used to feel like today I made an effort to wear a bright color, even though I was drawn to a lot of grays and browns and blacks. I'm always want to wear black, but when I specifically want to wear black and I want to feel more pink and yellow is when you want to incorporate more bright colors to make you feel more lively, more cheerful, more awake. Certain colors and fabrics make you feel more, even though this fabric is probably like lowering my body frequency, my signature frequency, because it's rayon. But you can incorporate natural fibers in other ways. What?
You're shining.
Oh, thank you. You can incorporate natural fibers in your home in other ways. Doesn't mean your whole home has to be natural linen and your clothing, but it means to incorporate natural things into your dress and your home as much as you could, to balance out all of the metals or the less live, high frequency things. But I thought that was just amazing how science is catching up to what Torah has been telling us from the beginning of time. So Torah doesn't have to spell out for us, Shatnez is for this and this. Obviously there's more divine reasons, but everything the Torah tells us is divine. And when the Torah puts such an emphasis on what we wear and on our clothing, and realizing, like Ashes Potiphar realizes, that if I can get him to change his way of dress, it'll affect him. He'll feel more Egyptian, and then he'll be more open to being seduced by me. Because the way he dresses, if he dresses more Egyptian, it will affect him. Now, by being so stuck as a Jew, he remembers every minute, I'm a Jew, I'm an Israeli, right? I'm connected to Israel. He always called himself Israeli. But if I can get him to change that, I know that his clothing will affect how he views himself, and then he'll be able to be seduced by me. So she recognized that. We maybe subconsciously recognize it, and the Torah definitely recognizes it by telling us specifically what type of clothing to wear to maximize the effect that it has on on us on every single level. Now, taking it to the next level. The clothing are actually a metaphor used in Hasidus and in the Zohar and in many places for the garments of our soul. So I'm going to read you a little verse from Tanya chapter 4. Tanya chapter 4, we learn in the beginning of Tanya that we have 2 souls. Each soul is equipped with 10 soul powers. Now, our soul powers is our personality, what type of soul we have, if we're more chesed, if we're more gevura, if we have, more netzach, more ambition, or if we're more quiet, introvert, and extrovert, every type of soul that we have. Now, the way that our soul, just like our body and our communicates to the world who we are by our clothing, right? Like, I want to communicate that I'm a woman, I wear woman clothing. If I want to feel more masculine, I wear more masculine clothing. I communicate. If I want everyone to know I'm a doctor, I wear my doctor clothing. And not only that, we say that we'll get to this soon, but our body, our soul as well has clothing. And the clothing are the way she interacts with the outside world. The soul needs clothing to express herself. Our clothing express us and let other people know what we are and who we are and what we're like a little bit. And our soul expresses itself to the outside world through 3 garments. And I'll read to you in English the Tanya verse that tells us what clothing are. Okay.
And you said we have how many soul powers?
We have 10 soul powers. They're called the 10 kochos nefesh, or the 10 spheros. So it's Chabad, Chagas, and Ahim. And they're all different because each one of us have different emphasis in different ones. So we all have all 10 soul powers, but you might have a strong lean towards the chesed or gevura, and there's infinite amounts of unique combinations of all of them. And that's why we're all unique and different. But that's a whole class on its own. Okay, so Tanya says, every divine soul, we have 2 souls. We're talking about the divine soul. Every divine soul, our godly soul, which just wants to be one with God and one with our essence, which is God, possesses 3 garments, these are the 3 clothing that our divine soul has, and our animal soul. Thought, speech, and action. Expressing, and what are the thought, speech, and action of the divine soul? When our divine soul expresses its desires and love for God and wanting to be one with the infinite in doing the mitzvos, the commandments in the Torah. And he says, how do we do all of them? When you use your power of speech, that's one of the divine clothing, to daven, to speak about Hashem's Torah, and to learn Torah. And then when you use your mind to learn as much as there is accessible to him in the levels of learning Torah, and to think positive things and to think positive thoughts. And when you use your body to do good deeds. So when your soul vests itself in using the actions of good deeds and the speech of saying kind things and kind words and the speeches of tefillah and its thought to use Torah, then the soul is now expressing its innate desire and love for Hashem in its garments of thought, speech, and action. Now we learn, why are they called garments? Why aren't they called soul expressions or words? And they say that the soul's garments are exactly like clothing. that have so many similarities to clothing, which is why the expressions of the soul of thought, speech, and action, which seem to be not clothing, they seem to be like physical, what's the word? Expressions, actualizations of the soul, call it actualization. Why is it like clothing? Because we're told that the same way, in a few ways, the main way is that just like clothing are interchangeable. I can change my clothing in 1 second. My clothing are not connected to who I am. I could wear one pair of clothing and I could change 5 times a day. I could probably change like 3 times today already. And then I can wear someone else's clothing. My clothing don't have to be connected to my essence. It's so easy to change my clothing. Similarly, it's also so easy to change our garments of our soul, our thought, speech, and action. Whereas it's much harder to change who I am, right? To change my personality, my actual soul is really difficult. Even to change my name, right? Legally, it's so hard. But to change my soul's powers, even though that's not the essence of the soul, it's really difficult. If you're a chesed, extrovert person, it's really hard to change that and become an introvert. It's almost impossible to change your soul's powers and the essence of your soul. But the clothing of the soul, we're told, are much easier to change and swap. And in a way, they seem very impersonal. And also, they can make you hypocritical, because you can be somebody really, in clothing way, right? You can be somebody feeling really gross on the inside, and then you wear a bright pink dress and everyone thinks you're so fun and happy today, but you're not, right? So you can wear one thing that doesn't express who you are. You can also put on a doctor's outfit when you're not, like on Purim, which really teaches us, we're going to talk about more about this on Purim, hopefully. But you can also dress up and pretend to be something that you're not. So clothing allow you to be something that you're not and to be somewhat of a hypocrite, which usually is a bad thing. And our soul powers as well, we can switch. It tells you how easily it is that you can be thinking and wanting to say in the middle of saying something really negative about another person, but you can stop and switch that to a kind thing instead. Or you can be about to yell at your kid or say something like you're annoyed at your spouse, but you can switch that. The same way I can switch my clothes 3 times before this year, I can also switch my thought patterns or my speech patterns. I can control my active thoughts, my conscious thought, not my subconscious thought, what I'm choosing to think about and dwell. Like putting on a meditation, I can choose what to put into my mind, what to listen to. I can also choose what to, I can't choose what I feel, right? We can't choose our feelings. We can't choose who we love. We can't change the fact that we love something or don't like something, but I can change my thoughts, my thoughts that I'm in control of. I can change my speech. I can be middle of about to say something critical to my husband and then stop and be like, you know what? I'm going to say something really nice instead. I'm about to yell at my kids and instead I stop mid-sentence and say, what? And my kid says what? And I was going to tell him, like, you literally trashed the house. Instead, I'm like, I love you so much, right? We have complete control over those great moments. Other times it's the opposite, right? But we have complete control over, or to the capacity to change our clothing and not be tied down to clothing just because we're wearing it, just because I've been wearing the same, outfit, like leggings and the same skirt for 3 days doesn't mean I can change it and dress normally for 1 day, right? So we have the capacity to change our clothing, and we have the capacity to change our thoughts, speech, and action, even though we might not have capacity to change our soul and our tendencies and our desires and our feelings. And that gives us so much empowerment, even though it seems so hypocritical that I can be someone I'm not, and I can be two-faced, and I could be like, in the inside, I hate you, but on the outside, I'm smiling and saying, like, I'm choosing to be kind and say, you're so great to see you today, I'm so happy to see you. It seems hypocritical, but we're told that it's actually the most powerful tool that we have. That the same way it's not hypocritical to wear something really bright if I'm feeling down. In fact, it's just uplifting me. So we learn that our clothing come from the Tanya tells us that our garments, physically and more spiritually, come from a higher place in our soul themselves, because our soul is stuck and limited to its level. But through my clothing, I can be a really, not happy person and wear something that elevates me. My clothing can take me to be something that I'm even higher than my actual soul's potential. And the same way that I can be somebody who's not very kind, but I can do kind actions. And it's hypocritical in the best way possible, because my clothing can take me to a level that I'm not at. And they can make me act like somebody I'm not at until it really influences me and I feel more kind. Like the Rebbe, that famous story of the Rebbe, where somebody felt that they're so selfish and they said they have no friends and everyone says that they're selfish and they can't stop being selfish. And the Rebbe didn't tell them, read this book, right? And change who you are and meditate. He said, tomorrow when you go to the cafeteria, remember the story? When you go bring yourself a spoon, take an extra one for the next person next to you. And that was it. And she said it transformed her life, because we can do actions that don't mirror who we are inside, and then it ends up influencing you. And you realize, wow, that feels so good. I like to give, and bring out that part of your soul. So we can change who we are, but we can change our garments. And that is really the highest level of clothing, that our clothing can take our soul somewhere higher than we are, just like our physical clothing can make us and actualize how we want to be rather than how we're actually feeling on the inside in the best way possible. And I'll end up with a story about the hypocrisy of clothing, in a way. That there was the third Chabad Rebbe had a chassid, and he was a big businessman, and he would wear the traditional Hasidic clothing, a long black long black overcoat like the Hasidim wear, and a black hat or a black shtreimel. And he would eventually, when he would travel to big cities to do business like Paris and Leipzig, which were the big commercial cities, he felt really embarrassed and uncomfortable of his Hasidic garb and his white socks and all that, and slowly he started to switch to formal business attire. But when he came to visit his Rebbe, he obviously didn't wear that. He wore his Hasidic garb, his traditional Hasidic garb, and time after time, that's what he did. But at one point he said, what kind of hypocrite am I, like pretending to the Rebbe that I'm still wearing this Hasidic garb? I can't lie to him anymore. And the next time he went to the Rebbe, he decided, I'm just going to wear what I usually wear, so I don't want to feel like a hypocrite to him. And he wore his usual business attire, right? His tie, his suit, whatever they wore in those days, his pants, his suspenders. And when he walked into the Rebbe, he told the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, you think I didn't know that when you go to Leipzig and you go to Paris that you wear different clothing? I knew that, but I thought that to them, you were being the hypocrite, and here you were being your true self. And this is so powerful because we really get to choose what external actions. We never get to have to feel like a bad hypocrite, like we're being a hypocrite because we're choosing to, do actions that I'm smiling at somebody, but even though, I'm feeling like I really just don't want to be with them, that's not bad. That's who your truest essence is. At the deepest core, you are a kind, nice person. Right now you feel like garbage, but that's a part of you that you're not tied to, and you don't have to feel like a bad person because your actions are bad. The same way you can throw away clothing that don't make you happy anymore, that don't spark joy, like I love to do, you can also throw away actions that don't spark joy in you anymore. And you don't have to be tied to your actions just because you did something terrible, or you were a really bad person yesterday, or you screamed at your kids and everybody and you had a horrible day. That doesn't mean that you are a bad person. That means that that's the clothing you wore yesterday, and we can discard clothing and throw them out and wear new clothing tomorrow and not feel like a hypocrite and start fresh. And our clothing really they impact us temporarily, but they don't say who we are. They're just external, and that is the power of clothing and their source that comes at such a high level. And hopefully that clues us into understanding the message that we can understand from the clothing of the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen, and the significance of exactly what we wear, and how there's so much depth to it, and the influence that it has on the avoda of the Kohen, and why if he's wearing the wrong clothing, it can influence his entire avoda to be wrong and to be not valid, because it can influence him to be on a completely different mindset than he actually is. And the white and the linen was chosen with intention because there's definitely spiritual and deep significance to how it affects his presence of mind, his state of heart, and so many levels, right? Just like when you wear that king who protected his person and made him wear the king's garb, it gave him fear and honor and kavod and glory. So let us all choose to be the best versions of ourselves as much as we can. And when we don't, that's okay to switch to good clothes as soon as we remember, and switch to fresh clothes. Let us feel and act like the best versions of ourselves we can, and not not judge ourselves like being hypocrites or in any way. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Cheers, l'chaim. I think it was really long today.